We'll be looking at William Butler Yeats's Among School Children in this video. Before we move on to the poem proper, let's have a look at his biography briefly. For there is an intrinsic connection between what he writes and what he is. W.B. Yeats, or William Butler Yeats, was born in Dublin in 1865 to a Catholic artistic family. Yeats spent much of his childhood moving between London and his mother, the place where his mother's family were from, a place in Ireland called County Sligo, where his Yeats began writing very early and published his first work in 1885. In 1889, Yeats met the Irish patriot, revolutionary, and beauty Maud Gonne, with whom he said to have fallen in love with immediately, and remained so for the rest of his life, despite being happily married towards the latter part of his life. Virtually every reference to love and a beloved in Yeats's poetry can be understood as a reference to his feelings for Maud Gonne. Tragically, Gonne did not return his feelings. Yeats lived during a tumultuous time in Ireland, partly because of his love for the politically active Maud Gonne. Yeats devoted himself during the early part of his career to the literary revival and to Irish patriotism. He quickly rose to literary prominence and helped to found Abbey Theatre, one of the most important cultural institutions in Ireland. In 1923, Yeats was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. Yeats reached his full powers as a poet in late in life, between the ages of 50 and 75, which I find very comforting. He sustained it up until the very end of his life, writing magnificent poems and up until the last 2 weeks prior to his death. Let's look at the poem Among School Children. The first stanza describes the poet's visit to a progressive convent school at Waterford in 1926 as a member of a government committee appointed to investigate the state of Irish education. The poem begins in the first person I. It begins by describing a guided tour and reaches philosophic heights towards the end of it. In the words of W.H. Hudson, I quote, Yeats has a knack of raising occasional poetry to the level of profound poetry, of universal appeal and significance. Among School Children can be cited as an example, end quote. This poem is considered to be one of the finest of Yeats's compositions, which attempts at synthesizing the 60-year-old smiling public man, the aged one-time love, and the would-be philosopher into something as organic as the chestnut tree and the dancer that we read about in this poem. Let's move on to the analysis of the poem. First stanza. I walk through the long schoolroom questioning. A kind old nun in a white hood replies, the children learn to cipher and to sing, to study reading books and history, to cut and sew, be neat in everything, in the best modern way. The children's eyes, in momentary wonder, stare upon a 60-year-old smiling public man. The poet says that he went through the long classroom from one end to the other, asking questions to which his guide, a kind old nun, provided answers. In the school, Yeats finds children learning to solve arithmetic problems, to sing, cut, and sew. The students are also made to read books and histories. They are required to be neat and clean and to do everything in the best modern way, which could be read as a reference to Montessori method, which was newly introduced at that time. There is surprise in the eyes of the students at seeing the 60-year-old old smiling public man, that is Yeats himself. The use of the present simple in the description makes the experience immediate. The entire stanza is made of two clauses joined by a semicolon. The rhyming scheme is A, B, A, C, A, B, D, D. The stanza is strongly visual. The dash in the sixth line indicates the break in the man's attention at noticing the children staring at him. Moving on to the second stanza, I dream of a Lydian body bent above a sinking fire, a tale that she told of a harsh reproof or trivial event that changed some childish day to tragedy. Told, and it seemed that our two natures blent into a spear from youthful sympathy, or else to alter Plato's parable into the yolk and white of one shell. In the second stanza, the poet's thoughts go back to Morgan, a woman he was in love with, who was once graceful and beautiful like Leda of the Greek myths. Through this classical allusion, Yeats reveals Gon's beauty, elevates Gon's beauty to superhuman beauty. The poet imagines Gon confiding in him about being reproved harshly or of an insignificant happening which had made her miserable as a child. Trivial event that changed some childish day to tragedy, he says. The act of sharing this experience had generated sympathy in their youthful hearts, which in turn merged their natures into a spear, the most perfect form in existence, or to an egg with its yolk and white contained in one shell. In the second instance, the two youths opt to keep their differences while forming a whole that would give birth to something that is entirely new and more perfect than both of them in their individuality. Here, once again, Yeats is making use of Aristophanes' description of love in a Socratic dialogue and referring to the two youths merging to form a spear. The rhyming scheme in this stanza is E, F, E, F, E, F, G, G. The third stanza. In thinking of that fit of grief or rage, I look upon one child or the other there and wonder if she stood so at that age. For even daughters of the swan can share something of every paddler's heritage, and had that colour upon cheek or hair, and thereupon my heart is driven wild. She stands before me as a living child. In the third stanza, the poet comes back from his world of imagination in which he had been thinking of Gon's fit of grief or rage, to the classroom of the school where he was a visitor, and take a look at the children in the classroom, wondering if Gon might have looked like any of the girls at the same age. The poet justifies his attempt by positing that, I quote, even daughters of Swan, end quote, that is a reference to Helen and Clytemnestra, share certain qualities such as color upon cheek or hair of the children of ordinary mortals, which he calls peddler's heritage. Here, peddler could be read as reference to ordinary aquatic birds which do not have divine associations. All of a sudden, the image of Maud Gonne, as she must have been in her school days, appears in front of the poets, and it is not clear whether this is one of the children or a projection of his mind. His heart is driven wild by the vision. In this stanza too, Yeats continued to use the classical allusion introduced in the first stanza. Here too, he continues to rely strongly on visual images. The rhyming scheme is HI, 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 JJ. The fourth stanza. Her present image floats into the mind. Let quarter cent to finger fashion it. hollow of cheek as though it drink the wind and took a mess of shadows for its meat. And I thought never of Leda and kind, had pretty plumage once, enough of that. Better to smile on all that smile and show there is a comfortable kind of old scarecrow. In the earlier stanza, the poet imagines Mood Gone as a little girl standing before him in the school, just as she must have been in her school days. The very next moment, in the fourth stanza, the poet thinks of Mood Gone as she must be now in her old age. The caesura, or the pause at the end of the first line, implies the shock the poet may have felt at being jarred into reality by the image of Gong as she really was. Now she appeared so gaunt, he thinks that she probably lived on shadows and wind for food and drink. Using a rhetorical question, the poet wonders whether she had been painted by the school of 15th century Italian painters who were known for their preference to paint emaciated figures. Then the poet adds, though he had never possessed the kind of beauty the children of Leda had, he too had pretty plumage, that he was handsome. Here he continues with the avian metaphor, with the use of the word plumage or feathers to refer to his looks. But now his good looks and youth are no more. Once again, the caesura implies a break in the train of thought. Ultimately, he chides himself to snap out of his musings by declaring, I quote, enough of that, end quote. He resolves himself to act as a genial old man, I quote, a comfortable kind of old scarecrow, end quote. The rhyming scheme is KL, 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 MM. In the next stanza, what youthful mother, a shape upon her lap, honey of generation had betrayed, and that musty shriek struggled to escape, as recollection or the drug decide, would think her son, did she but see that shape with 60 or more winters on its head, a compensation for the pang of his birth, or the uncertainty of his setting forth. In the first half of the stanza, the poet refers to the Platonic parable on how children were created. According to a Socratic dialogue, the ideal beings that existed in the world of forms as pure energy got attracted to the honey of generation produced by couples who were having sex. Once within a human womb, the ideal being became trapped in its earthbound form. Thus, it shrieked, struggled to escape. If it gives into the recollection of the former energy form, it leaves behind the earthbound body. And if it gives into the drug, the honey of generation, it becomes earthbound. In the earlier stanza, the poet has shown how Maud Gong and he looked in their old age. She, an old hollow-cheeked woman, and he, a smiling scarecrow. In this stanza, the poet explores the relationship between a child and a mother. The poet, with no small amount of self-pity in it, wonders if a young mother would consider the newborn son, a shape upon her lap, was a compensation for the pang of his birth, if she had been able to see the shape with 60 or more winters on its head, and the uncertainty of his setting forth, that is, his future. The juxtaposition of image of a newborn with an old man is very evocative. The entire stanza is one long run-on line forming a rhetorical question, rhyming N-O, N-O, N-O-P-P. Moving on to the next stanza, Plato thought nature but a spume that plays upon a ghostly paradigm of things. Solid Aristotle played the toes upon the bottom of a king of kings. World-famous golden Pythagoras fingered upon a fiddlestick or string what a star sang, and careless muses heard. Old clothes upon old sticks to scare bird. In stanza 6, the poet generalizes the ravages caused by the passage of time as a universal phenomenon that even the best minds of the world could not escape. There are several historical allusions which underscore the sheer greatness of the men he is talking about. Yeats begins with Plato and his view of cosmogony with reference to his theory of ideas. Then he talks about Aristotle's cosmology. The lines on Aristotle can be interpreted at least in two ways. According to one view, a king of kings refers to the prime mover, and the toes or marbles would be the concentric spheres which constituted the worlds and to which the prime mover was believed to give impetus or movement. In that sense, the lines can be read as an ironic reference to the negligence of the prime mover, since he has turned away from his creation, allowing it to fall victim to wreck and ruin. However, this line of argument has two weaknesses. Should the phrase a king of kings refer to the prime mover, it should have been phrased with the first king with written in capital K to befit the bearer's status. Consequently, it is more logical to read these lines as a reference to Aristotle's position as a teacher of Alexander the Great, a king of kings, whose bottom he may have tanned as punishment. The poet then proceeds to refer to philosopher Pythagoras, who believed in the music of spheres. Briefly put, Plato located reality in unnatural ghostly forms. Aristotle located it in nature, and Pythagoras discovered it in music. But despite their brilliance, in his old age, each one of these philosophers became a scarecrow. The conclusion may have offered yet some comfort. Greater men had been the victim of his fate. Looking at the penultimate stanza, both nuns and mothers worship images, but those the candles light are not as those that animate a mother's reverie, but keep a marble or a bronze repose. And yet they too break hearts, O presences, that passion, piety, or affection knows, and that all heavenly glory symbolize, O self-born mockers of man's enterprise. The seventh stanza elaborates on a similarity between nuns and mothers. Both worship or adore images. Nuns worship images of saints, the Virgin Mary, and the Christ, while mothers adored their children, who were considered images of their parents. The images in front of which the nuns light candles in adoration or worship are made of marble or bronze, and they bear an expression of tranquility or repose. They are not the same images that animate a mother's reveries, giving life to a mother's daydreams and thoughts. But these images too break the hearts of their worshippers by not granting what they pray for as a result of their inability to emphasize or sympathize with one another, with the ones who worship them. Their serene features don't change in empathy as they keep a marble or bronze repose. Next, the poet addresses the presences and expresses his wish that they too were capable of feeling human feelings such as passion, piety, or affection, and symbolize all heavenly glory. However, his conclusion is that the presences, being self-born, unlike human beings who need parents to be born, are mockers of man's enterprise, all human endeavors. The caesura used towards the middle of the sixth line marks a sense of desperation in the poet in his wish that the divine had a human and humane touch. However, the caesura at the end of the penultimate line indicates despair at the thought that his wish is not going to be granted by heaven. Here, there is a reference to an almost deistic religious belief, a belief in the existence of a supreme being, specifically of a creator who does not intervene in the universe. Looking at the last stanza, labor is blossoming or dancing where the body is not bruised to pleasure soul, or beauty born out of its own despair, no blear-eyed wisdom out of midnight oil, O chestnut tree, great-rooted blossomer, are you the leaf, the blossom, or the bowl, O body swayed to music, O brightening glance? How can we know the dancer from the dance? In the last stanza, the poet looks at the idea of wholeness as the only possible source of joy for human beings in a world bereft of divine assistance. Both change and lack of change torment humanity. He concludes that human endeavors can blossom or dance only when one does not engage in self-mortification in order to please the soul, or when wisdom does not require pain-filled processes of studying. Out of mortality, the poet calls forth the metaphors of a chestnut tree and dancer, one from nature and the other one from the world of man. The poet finds out that blossoming and dancing are possible only when the being is whole and in harmony with it itself. The essence of the chestnut tree is in its wholeness and not in its separate parts. Similarly, the dancer and his or her dancing movements are not separable. The conclusion these observations would have offered Yeats is that the prominent components of his personality, the star-crossed lover, the philosopher, and the aging public figure, are all a part of personality, an essential whole called Yeats. When one looks at each section, one may be disappointed, but together the separate components that constitute an organism form a harmonious whole. The last stanza consists of 3 clauses, 1 statement and 2 rhetorical questions. In the rhetorical question, he invokes the chestnut and the dancer directly and field them with 2 questions. Looking at the techniques used, the poet uses quite a lot of visual images, rhetorical questions, pun, especially the word image there, punctuation, caesura and commas, right? Enjambment, invocation, classical and historical allusions, contrast, and symbols. When we look at symbols, we could take the scarecrow and the swan, and then peddlers, spheres or eggs, images, those can be taken as examples. Then the themes, the transience and aging versus repose of the marble and bronze images. Number 2, wholeness or the perfection versus fragmentation and imperfection or decay. Number 3, nuns and mothers' labor versus perfect labor of the tree and the dancer. What is happiness? Being in harmony with the different aspects of what constitute one. As long as you are frightened, you are unhappy. And the next one, imagination, or his youthful preoccupation with MG, in quote, versus reality. Right? The last theme is philosophy versus nature. Okay, with that we come to the end of this video. Let's meet in another video like this. Good night.